All right, everybody, welcome back. Bio Bros, episode 10. Alex is going to take the lead on this one today for two reasons. First of all, we're doing top five arachnids. I don't know a lot about that. The second one, I had a bit of an oral surgery today. Doesn't really hurt or anything, but it's not like ultra comfortable, so probably not the best one for me to take the lead on. And Alex hasn't had a full episode to himself in a couple now, so we'll give him this one. Similar to our other top five, we're just going to go through basic information about all of the species and basic care and things like that. It's going to be a bit of a mix of true spiders, uh, tarantulas, and scorpions for the most part. So, Alex, let's kick it off with number one.
So I'm actually going to start with number 5 because I'm going to work my way up to my number 1. And this is basically, it's going to be like the top beginner species that if you're wanting to get into arachnids, these are what I would recommend to get into. And obviously these aren't for everybody. Yes, they can bite. Yes, they do have venom. Most species, all the species except for one that I talk about today, don't have medically significant venom. And none of them that I'm going to talk about today are likely to bite unless you were harassing an animal or just not handling correctly. With that too, arachnids really aren't a handling species, or not handling, a handling pet. It's more of like a, look, this is really cool. I like to watch them eat. I like to watch them build their webs or tunnels or whatever. They're more of that. There are some you can handle, yes, and I will iterate that as I go through the list, but they, as a majority, they are not a handling species.
Yeah. I mean, kind of like frogs and fish. You don't necessarily buy them to hold them. You buy them because they're cool and they look neat, right? Like,
Exactly.
you buy a dog or a cat to interact with it, not necessarily a fish, right? You don't expect that. Kind of same thing for bugs. Go into it expecting not to have a best friend you're going to hold around.
Exactly. And it also, not only can it harm you, you can actually really harm your arachnid if they fall. Tarantulas and stuff don't take falls well. So, handle with care, handle at your own risk, basically. But so number 5, I'm going to start with is a species I have kept in the past. I don't currently keep. I probably will keep in the future. I think they're a very cool display animal. They're also the one species that does have medically significant venom, but this is not a species you hold at all. This is just a display species. And that's going to be the black widow. So there are different types of black widows. There's the western, there's eastern, southern, all that kind of stuff. But black widows are a super cool, easy species to keep. They tend to have a pretty tolerant temperament. Like I said, you're not a species you're going to be holding and stuff, but they'll build really cool webs. You can set up a really cool little enclosure, and then you just drop food into their webs that they have built, and they'll come out, wrap it up, and eat it. Females specifically are the ones that you're going to see in the hobby, really, unless you're trying to breed them. But the females are the ones that are the black with the red hourglass on them. They aren't a long-lived species. I kept mine, I think, a little over a year and a half is how long my female lasted. But they are, again, a very cool display species. Like, it's like, wow, I have a black widow. But unless you're messing with it or like sticking your fingers in its web and things like that, you're not likely to get bit. And then, especially if you're keeping it in a proper enclosure that it can't escape from. And they're just a really cool species that's super easy to care for. You just drop some bugs into their web, like maybe once a week, and they'll come out and they'll eat. They'll eat a variety of bugs. Basically, you can feed crickets, mealworms, beetles. If you catch moths, you can give them moths. Things like that.
Yeah, I actually really like black widows. One of the only arachnid species I really have an interest in keeping. I think they're super cool, but generally I'm not a bug guy to have in my house. Black widows are one I definitely have interest in. I want to do a cool little scape for it and have it look like something you would see in like an Adams Family movie. I think that'd be
Hmm.
a really cool vibe to have. Um, but yeah, that medically significant venom is something to watch out for. If you're not comfortable with having that, and eventually you are going to have to interact with the spider, you're going to have to move it from its transport little cup into its main enclosure at some point. You're going to have to open that enclosure to feed it, water it, all that kind of stuff. So if you're not comfortable with that little bit of work, probably not the best, but that's why it's number 5. Awesome in care, generally good temperament, but things can go wrong and they're not great for that.
Exactly, and that is exactly why I put it at number 5 is because of the medically significant venom. Um, but yeah, they're really cool display species because they're so it's so pretty to have that jet black spider with the bright red hourglass. And one enclosure that they didn't have when I had mine, but I think it's really cool is by a company called Tarantula Cribs, and they have these acrylic enclosures that are held by neodyme magnets, hold the door shut and things like that. And they sell ones that are in the shape of a coffin, which I think would be an amazing Black Widow enclosure. I just think that'd be really cool. So I'm gonna go on to number 4, and number 4, it could be higher on the list. I'm keeping it at number 4 for me personally because I've keep two types of this, and they're very cool. I think they're very cool. They are one of the arachnids that make me a little uncomfortable. Like I will hold one of them, but not one species that I have. But you don't see them very often, if really ever. They are nocturnal most of the time, and they are very good at hiding and burrowing. And so that's going to be Asian forest scorpions. Um, so the reason they're number 3, like mine, like I said, mine, they I've seen her out all of once, and that was when I dug her out to reset up her enclosure. Um, they are a nocturnal species, and they are very true to that. They do not come out during the day. She's completely in her burrow, will not come out during the day. Um, they scorpions. So the two species I have is the Asian forest scorpions. And then I have desert hairy scorpion. They are very cool, very awesome animals, but I have always had that constant thought in the back of my head of waiting for that stinger because they're more reactive than other inverts or arachnids, it seems like, from my personal experience. They're more reactive and more likely to quickly, boom, they got you. At least with the desert hairy. I know with the Asian forest, they're more likely to pinch you than they are to sting you. But desert hairies have smaller pinchers and they are more likely to sting you. They don't have medically significant venom, but that does not mean it is not going to hurt because it's not going to feel good. Um, but again, you just don't really see them. But they are super easy to care for. Um, give them a nice substrate to burrow in. I do live plants with my Asian forest scorpion. I have a shallow water bowl. Spray down her tank maybe twice a week, 3 times a week. Keep that because they like a little more humidity. They're a tropical species. And then she just eats. I feed her roaches. I'll feed her crickets. Um, the crickets I'll throw in there. The roaches I tend to, if she's out or I see her, I'll give them to her because they will bury themselves. Um, and if you do heat for them, which some people do, not everyone does, you want to put your heat pad on the side of the enclosure. And the reason being is Asian forest scorpions, if they're wanting to get away from heat, they're going to burrow down. So if you have the heat pad underneath the enclosure and they're burrowing down to get away from heat, they're just going to get closer and they're going to end up cooking themselves.
I actually have a little bit of experience with both of these species. Um, Asian forest scorpions I've held before, and messed around with a little bit. They're super cool. They're
Hmm.
probably one of the most handleable arachnids around,
Hmm.
and they have a really cool vibe to them. They're like solid black and they're huge. And desert hairy scorpions. One of my friends kept one that we caught in his. I think that one came from his garage, and he kept it. It was a super cool pet, and they're native to where I live. If you can't tell, um, they're super cool. They're super chill. I've never experienced them being spicy at all. Like for me, they've
Mine
always been
is.
chill as scorpions. Um, could be that I have some nastier ones out here where I live, but they are pretty chill. Like for me, this little side tangent here. It's a native species, but probably on the worst pet arachnids list, which happens to be one of the ones I want, is the Sonoran bark scorpions. Those do have medically significant venom and have killed people. Um, those are super cool, but they're tiny. You don't see them, and they're super toxic. So definitely, desert harries are way better in every regard. So I could have a little bit
Yes.
of bias of why I think they're so chill, because they're the chillest I've interacted with out in the desert here.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, mine has got a pretty laid back attitude. It was more of like when I first got the species and first put him in his enclosure. He was cool for a bit, and then I was in front of his enclosure, and like I put my fingers just sitting in front of him, and he full on went forward, going to go for my hand. I was on the outside of the closure, obviously. I didn't want him. I was not about to stick my hand in there with a angry scorpion. But he mine just seems more likely to sting as soon as it feels threatened. Um, but again, they don't have medically significant venom, so that's always a good thing. If they do sting you, it's like a bee sting. It's gonna hurt. It probably hurts a little bit more than a bee sting because they are bigger, but it's not gonna cause the average human to like need to go to the hospital or anything like that.
No, I know several people who have been stung by the desert hairy scorpions, and it's not that bad. I've
Yeah,
heard um, everybody here calls everything a bark scorpion or a desert hairy scorpion, so it is kind of hard to determine exactly what species stung people. Confirmed reports of a desert hairy for real, because like I saw a scorpion, a little worse than a bee sting. Some people say it's not quite as bad, so that's gonna be individual reaction, but it's close to bee sting, and I can attest to that one by seeing the actual stings happen.
yeah, yeah. It varies per person. Obviously, the venom affects everybody differently. So I'm gonna move on to number three, which this one is my large. Well, yeah, she's still my largest arachnid that I have currently. That's just because the rest have not gotten to adult size, and she's pretty darn close. Um, and I got her as an adult. I personally like them a lot. Again, just not a species you're going to handle. You can handle them. People have done it plenty of times. They're just not a big handling species. They are an arboreal species, which I think is kind of cool with arachnids. Um, and they are a tropical species, and that to me is also cool because like I just did a build. We just posted it on Instagram of the enclosure for this species, and I have like full plants. I'm planning on doing it completely bioactive. I just got to get some isopods and things like that. But she hides most of the time. Again, it's a species that is going to crawl down into bark tubes and things like that and build their webs inside of them, and they're just going to chill there. They will come out and eat. They will jump on prey and things like that. But I just think they're a cool species because I think they're really pretty. They're a majority black species. Their setae, which is the hairs on them, can have like pinks and stuff to them and blues to them. And so the species I'm talking about is the Guyana pink toe or Aviculera aviculera. Um, and they are a really cool arboreal species. Like I said, they're majority jet black. Their little tips of their feet have little pink colors, hence the name pink toe. And they come from Guyana. Um, they're very simple species to keep. They do like it a little more humid, a little more tropical. You do have to be careful with spraying them because you don't want to spray them like directly and things like that. And I think they're just a really cool species. I would keep them higher. on the list, but like I said, you don't see them a ton, and you can't really handle them very much because they do go down into their tubes and things like that. Um, but once it's like getting towards nighttime and like her light turns off, but not everyone else in the room turns off, I'll see her crawl out and be crawling all over the enclosure. It's really cool. Um, Seeing her do that, and then her feeding response is pretty good too.
Hmm. I do have a bit of a question before we get on to the top two. With
Sure.
these, how do you go about keeping them? Because I know everybody who keeps arachnids and stuff tends to have like 10 plus. Very rare to see somebody just like one. Everyone has a lot of them. And so, like, how do you go about keeping them? Like, what does their basic tank setup about look like for most species? Like, how much space in
So
my house am I gonna have to dedicate and things like that?
the thing about arachnids, a lot of times, why you see so many people keeping so many of them is because they don't need a lot of space. Um, in reality, you could probably keep like my Aviculera is in a 12 by 14 enclosure, so it's 14 wide, 12 tall. I think it's 14 or 12 deep too. I'm not 100% sure. I'm not 100% sure on the dimensions, but it's supposed to be like a 12, 12, 12 basically. Um, and they can live in that in their entire lives. Like she's almost full grown, and she can live in there her entire life. You can go bigger. I've seen people have giant enclosures that have this species. And like with this average size, it depends on the species as well. Because like some species, like my pumpkin patch tarantula, she won't get any bigger than 2 or 3 inches leg span. But then you have species like uh, my gray bird eater, which is it's a Lasiodorus species. I can't remember the exact species, but they'll get as big as a dinner plate leg span. I mean, they get 9 inches plus leg span. So I would keep in like a 20 long versus my pumpkin patch, who I'm keeping in I think it's 8 by 4 and like 4 tall because they're more terrestrial species. Um, but that's why a lot of people keep more arachnids and stuff when they keep them is because they're easier to keep more. Like you don't have to dedicate a whole bunch of space. Like I have, if I remember, I think I have 13 species currently, and I could fit all of them on a desk, or close to all of them on a desk. The biggest enclosure I have right now for mine is either the 12 by 12 for my Guyana pink toe, or I have a 10-gallon for my Asian forest scorpion. And a 10-gallon is like on the big size for a lot of arachnids. Again, depending on species, do your research. Not every species grows to a certain size, and they do range to between male and female. Males tend to be smaller, females tend to be bigger. Um,
So that's actually
but
a pretty big plus side to keeping bugs and arachnids and stuff is you don't really have to dedicate a lot of space to them. Like they're pretty small.
yeah,
And
you don't.
I know a lot of them are ambush predators too. So like they're not going to move and they don't really want to move. If there's a spot, this is true with rattlesnakes as well. There's some studies going around that a full western diamondback rattlesnake's home range can be as small as a quarter mile because they're ambush predators. So if they're in a spot where there's good flow of food coming by them that they can eat, they're really not going to move. Like I
Mhm.
know of people finding the same snake in the same bush years later. Like that guy hasn't really left, and I know that's true with arachnids as well, a lot of them. So you don't actually they're totally fine chilling in the same hole pretty much their whole lives.
Yeah, because they most of their actings actually dig their own burrows and stuff too. So really, they'll just stay in the same hole the majority of their life. And the other pluses with them is you really don't need heat because most of the time they're fine. If you're comfortable, they're comfortable. Um, they don't need light really. Obviously, don't keep them in pitch black all the time, but like your ambient light in your room and stuff is normally enough. I keep lights on some of mine just because I like seeing them and stuff more often, but other species I don't. It also depends on the species because some species really do not like light, and they'll actually hide completely from it. Um, but yeah, they're really simple and species, and some of them too. It's like depending on the species, especially like if you get a fossorial species, which means that they live underground in big dig full on tunnels and stuff like that. You sometimes will just have a pet box of dirt. Like, yeah, if you're really into arachnids, the little bit of times you'll get to see those spiders coming out of their hides and things like that makes it worth keeping those kinds of species. Um, it's not for everybody though, because some fossorial species you'll never see. I mean, I have a Tanzanian chestnut baboon, um, which is a fossorial species, and I maybe see her once or twice when she comes out to grab crickets sometimes. Most of the time, she's underground. I almost never see her.
I see those Instagram videos of the sand spiders, and they're just little cups of sand. And
Oh,
then
yeah.
obviously, like the videos for Instagram, you see them put the food in and they move, and then they catch the food and they pull it right back in. Like it's a pet
Yep.
cup of sand.
Oh, yeah. I mean, but sometimes though, when you have fossorial species, you'll see them because, like, I have my Cameroon red baboon tarantula, which is a fossorial species. But the cool thing with them, she's dug a burrow that goes all the way down completely to the bottom of her closure, but it's right against the glass. So I can see the majority of her burrow. And she also just sits at the top of her burrow a lot of times. Like she has this huge burrow, but she'll just sit at the top and chill, like waiting for food to come by. Um, so it just depends on the spider, it depends on the species. Not all spiders are the same, not all species are the same when it comes to fossorial. But so to get on to my number two for uh, or beginner arachnids. So this one is gonna be. I've been debating on who I'm gonna put at number two, and I believe it is gonna be one that I keep currently, but I have only a sling of it, and it's a native species to the U.S. They're native to Shaw's area. They're native to a lot of the south, west U.S. And it's a Faunapelma hensi, or the common names are Texas brown, Missouri brown, all these different state brown tarantula. Um, and so I almost put them at number one because they are a super cool, pretty easy to keep species. Um, but a couple of reasons I didn't put them at number one. First, they're very slow growers. Um, I have a little sling that is maybe the size of my pinky nail, and I got him the beginning of this year, and I got a couple of other species at the same time. Like I got my pumpkin patch spider at the same time as him, and it was the same size. My pumpkin patch is now 2 or 3 times bigger than he is, and he's still the size of my pinky. A Faunapelma hensi is a very, very slow growing species. You will have a tiny spider for years.
For those at home, what is a sling?
So a sling is a baby spider, essentially. That's what they're referring to when they say a sling. It's a juvenile, not juvenile. It's a basically fresh out of the egg sac to once they get a little bit of size to them, they're called slings. Once they hit that juvenile size, they're no longer a sling. But basically, from juvenile to hatching out of the egg sac, they're slings. And like I said, a Faunapelma hensi, very, very slow growers. I probably will have that spider 5 or 6 years before he even breaks 2 inches.
But that's another plus though too, like because like very earlier, the Black Widow. that spider only lives like a year. So you'll actually have this pet for a while.
Yes, but it does also depend on if it's a male or a female. And that being said, because like he's growing or she's growing very slow. I'm hoping it's a she. They have to get to a mature, more larger size for you to be able to actually sex them, which that is a whole process in itself. And I can't really explain it very well on the podcast. But if it's a female, they can live 20, 30 years. If it's a male, you're lucky if you get 10, and that's an old male. Because a lot of tarantula species, when they're a male, once they get to sexual maturity, they stop eating. They just care about reproducing. And they run themselves to death. Because they just won't eat anymore. They don't do anything anymore. They care nothing about anything other than finding a female and reproducing. Um, and so it depends on the species too, because like males grow up faster, obviously, because they don't have as long to live. And it is also a pro and a con with the long time as a small spider, because when they're as small as he is, he's eating fruit flies, and like I mean like one or two a week, or pre-killed crickets. So you're having to go in there and kill a cricket, drop it in. If he doesn't come out and eat it, you gotta take the body out. It's more work essentially. Because he's so small, you can't even get small enough crickets to have him hunt it. Basically.
Yeah, but there's also services for larger ones, just going to be not as common because people put years into it, so it's going to be more expensive and
Oh yeah, I
harder
mean
to find.
you'll see a fauna pelmahenses as adults for sale. They're probably $200. Because like you said, people have put years into that spider. I will say that's another thing with the arachnids too. A lot of, not all of them, but like a lot of the beginner stuff tend to be cheaper. Not like dirt cheap, but they tend to be on the cheaper side when it comes to exotics.
Yeah, I mean, $200 is a lot for a spider, and like in our top 5 reptiles video, a lot of those are north of 200, and that's okay. That's like,
Yeah.
yeah,
It
that's that's how much it costs.
Yeah, and it depends on the spider too, because there's some species that go for thousands. Um, but so it was the slow growth rate was one of the reasons I didn't put it at number one. The other reason is when it gets to an adult, a lot of people aren't particularly into them because it's a big brown spider. There's really no pattern. There's no color. It's just a big brown spider. Um, I think it's still really cool just because I am into arachnids, I'm into tarantulas. I think that is cool. But a lot of people look at that and go, okay, he doesn't move much, he doesn't grow much. It's a big brown spider. Why do I have this? um so that was why I didn't put him at number 1. But again, they're very cool tarantulas. They are again native to the US. They're in Texas. I think they're in Arizona. Actually, no. I think it's a
I was
different
just pulling
fauna
up their
pelma.
range just to see, if you wanna see, because I've seen several tarantulas out here. I'm not great at identifying bugs. It's one of my weak points, and these ones go to New Mexico. Some people actually, this source says they get here. So probably a limited population where I'm at.
Yeah, y'all tend to have. Now that I've thought about it, um, y'all tend to have more of the Arizona blonde tarantula in your
Yeah,
area,
I've
which is
definitely
another
seen
fauna
those.
pelma. Um, and a fauna pelma hensi tends to be more like Texas, Missouri, that area. Um, actually checking something real quick.
But
Yeah,
yeah, guys, bugs are pretty cool, actually. Like, I'm not really into keeping them a lot. There's a few on my list that definitely are not going to make this list. My list of favorite ones could pretty much be inverted, as if we did this episode as worst pet
or
arachnid.
expert.
Yeah. Like my dream scorpion is a Deathstalker scorpion, the most toxic scorpion in the world. Uh, I was doing a little bit of reading on him and stuff, and I instantly stumbled upon a forum post where a dude posted from inside the ambulance because he got stung by one.
Mm-hmm.
And those are super cool. Like my local pet store has them semi often, or it's the same ones that people haven't bought yet because they were smart. And every time I'm there, I think about it. So probably shouldn't. Not gonna recommend that. And then spiders too. Like there's only a couple I actually really like, uh, but yeah, like I like a lot of the dangerous stuff for some reason. I don't know why I do, but I'm
Oh,
a
I
fan.
mean, I do too. Like one of my favorite tarantulas that I keep. I don't see it very often, but it's one of my favorite ones that I keep. Is probably would be one of the worst for beginners, or not one of the worst. It's an intermediate. I will say that. Um, and it's called the OBT, so Orange Baboon Tarantula. I love them and love mine because they are bright orange. Like they are a very, very pretty orange spider, and the tips of their toes have like an iridescent blue. So they're a very pretty spider. Um, but the reason they are more intermediate and stuff is so OBT is Orange Baboon Tarantula. It also is their nickname in the hobby, which is Orange Bitey Thing, because they have an attitude. Mine surprisingly pretty mellow. Um, and you'll hear a lot of horror stories about them and stuff, but that's because a lot of people don't keep them correctly. And this is going on a little tangent, but OBTs most people keep is a terrestrial or almost fossorial species. Like a lot of websites that I've been looking up tarantulas for sale, they have OBTs under fossorial. But in reality, they are a terrestrial slash semi-arboreal species, I would say. I keep mine in a 5 gallon, or no, not 5 gallon, 2.5 gallon for a smaller tarantula. And the reason I keep her in a bigger enclosure is because the reason OBTs tend to have attitude with a lot of people is they build extensive webs. So when they have them in these smaller enclosure, the web's all over the door, and every time they open the door, you're ripping open their home, and they get defensive. They're like, "Oh my god, what is happening?" And they are very quick to throw a threat posture, which for somebody who's not used to it is terrifying. I mean, the spider stands up on its hind legs, showing its fangs, and if you go near, it comes down really quick and will try and bite. Um, but that is its way of saying, "Hey, I'm here. I'm scary. Go away." But like I said, most people don't keep them with that kind of space, so they're just ripping open their webs all the time, which makes them more defensive. Mine, in the 2.5 gallon, all of her webs, I have one of those fake human skulls in there. She's built every single bit of her web inside of that skull. And I never touched the web. I opened the enclosure. I put food right at the back opening of the skull because there's like a hole in the back where she has a web going to the glass. I'll put food right there. She shoots out, grabs it, and she's done. I mean, doesn't have an attitude. Even when I moved her in there, when I did move her in there, she threw threat posture, but that's because I was digging her out of her old home. But yeah, after that tangent, they are not good for beginners because they are also an old world species, which the difference with tarantulas with New World and Old World. New World is species that are from North, Central, and South America. They tend to have non-medically significant venom, and they tend to have what they call urticating hairs. So it's the hairs on the spider where they can kick them, and they can get in your hands, and it feels like fiberglass. It's really itchy. Old world species are species from Australia, Asia, Africa. They tend to have medically significant venom, and they don't have urticating hairs, so they tend to be more defensive, faster, and more likely to run and bolt or bite species. So for beginners, always stick with New World. There are a few Old World species that are good to transition, but do your research once you get into tarantulas if you want to go from New World to Old World. But New World is the best for beginners because they don't have the medically significant venom, and they tend to be more relaxed.
All right, so you ready for number one? It's gonna be
Yes.
best pet arachnid you can find in Alex's opinion, and I'll probably agree with it.
So my number one species is the species that most people, when they think tarantula, think of this without even knowing what it is. And it's the Mexican red knee tarantula. Or there's two different species that both have that name. There's Brachypelma hamori and Brachypelma smithii. Now, smithii has finally been classified separate, so its common name has changed from Mexican red knee to the Smith's red knee, but most people still interchange them and stuff. They're very similar looking spiders. There's only small differences. But typically, when people think of a tarantula, one of those two species is the species they think of. That is what people image. They're the black spiders with orange on their joints and on a little ring around their, um, not their abdomen. Their, I'm blanking. Carapace. Um, but that is the species most people think of. Now, they are a New World species native to Mexico. Um, they tend to be very relaxed, very calm species. They are not a very fast growing species, but they're not as slow as, say, like the Phonopomelhensi. They are very pretty, vibrant tarantulas. Like they have the stark contrast between the blacks and the orange. Um, they're also a species that most people feel comfortable handling. They are very unlikely to bite. Um, Mine, she has never thrown a threat posture at me. The most she's ever done is kick some hairs, and that was really only when she was younger. Now she's a good size, probably 2-inch tarantula, and I open her and close her. And when I first got her, I opened her, closed her, she darted into her burrow. Now she's filled her burrow out, and I haven't seen her in a burrow a single time since. She sits out on top and just chills. She is a very relaxed spider. She eats very well. I actually fed her today, and it's fun to watch because like you just put the food right in front of her on tongs, and you just touch one of her feet, and she pounces on it. Um, but again, much more of a relaxed species, more likely to be able to handle them. They're more likely to be out on display all the time, and they're a very simple species to keep. Really don't have to water them because they're a desert species. You do have to. They have a water bowl. Mine has a water bowl, a shallow water bowl that I will overfill probably about once a month. Let it overflow into her soil and give her a little humid corner. Um, and then she just eats crickets, or dubia roaches, or waxworms. Not waxworms, superworms. Basically, all kinds of bugs. And they're not super big webbers, but like I said, they're more than likely going to be out on display. They tend to be a chill species. They get a decent size. They can get 7-8 inch leg span, so they get a good size. And they're just a really cool species. And they are the one, like I said, people think of that spider when they think of tarantula.
Yeah, I
They've
mean, they're the ones that
been,
are in every movie ever.
yeah,
If you ever see a scene in a movie where like a tarantula crawls across someone's face, it's one of these.
yeah. It's
I'll
either
bet
Homora
a
or
lot.
Smithii.
Yeah, it's almost every single time. If you've ever been to like a zoo or something, they have a tarantula out and they're talking about it, like maybe let it crawl across some people's hands. It's one of these. These
Yeah.
are the champions of handleability in the arachnid world.
Yeah, they're a super simple species to keep. They're very pretty. They're out on display all the time, which is a big thing with tarantulas because not all species, most species aren't on display. I mean, I have, like I said, I have 13 species, and I have maybe two that I see all the time, or three. I have three species that I will see all the time. The rest, nope, I'll see them every now and again when they come out for food or when they come out at night. Every now and again, I do not see them constantly. I don't see them all the time. I don't even see them often. Some of them I rarely ever see. Um, but they just are an amazing display species. They like being out. They tend to be okay with being handled. Again, handle with care and handle at your own discretion. They can still bite. They do kick hairs if threatened. Um, but more than likely, they're going to be out for you to see. Out, easy to feed, easy to take care of, and they're just a cool spider.
Yeah, I'm a fan of them. Like, I don't know a ton about spiders and stuff, but they're everywhere. They're popular for a reason. This is just a quick thing that I kind of noticed too. If you see a species constantly being used in TV and movies, that means that thing is so chill and doesn't get stressed easily and doesn't care. That's usually a really good pet. You'll see
Yeah.
bearded dragons and crested geckos and blue tongues and things like that in movies and TV and stuff. Same thing with ball pythons, red-tailed boas, all that kind of stuff constantly. It's because 'cause they're really chill. They're really tolerant. So bugs, same thing. You see Asian forest scorpions if they're gonna use a scorpion, and they use red knee tarantulas if they're gonna use a spider.
Hmm.
Almost every time, because those are the best ones. They're super, super chill.
Yeah, and the Brachypelma homori and the Brachypelma spithi. In reality, I could have used any of the Brachypelma species. The majority of the Brachypelma genus is a very chill, mostly on display species. Um, and they all come from that Mexico area, Southwest area. But there's different ones. They're all different common names and stuff. Don't go off for common names. That's the thing with tarantulas and arachnids and stuff. Don't go off of common names because 5 different species can have the same common name. That's where you knowing your scientific names really comes into play because like Mexican red knee, that could be Brachypelma homori, it could be Brachypelma smithi. Um, Most people don't use the Smith's red knee yet, and that just recently came out as a common name. But that's a great example of like why with tarantulas specifically you want to use scientific names more than common names. Same with like the Guyana pinktoe. There is probably five or between 5 and 10 different species of pinktoe tarantulas, but they're all different. So it's where it comes into common. Really use your scientific names. If someone's selling them and they just have it under a common name, know that you might not be getting the exact species you think you are. A lot of sales people don't really use common names totally, or if they do, they have the scientific name with it. But that's a big thing with tarantulas and stuff. But they're great pets. Don't take very much space. Great, easy care animals, but again, not a handling animal. More of a display.
Yeah, no, I think that puts a pretty good wrap on it. Um, Again, like I said, guys, I'll be back full swing of things next week. I literally just had mouth surgery today, so not ideal for that one. But um, arachnids, Alex is into arachnids. He's doing tons of stuff with them, so it's pretty cool. And they are something I am interested in. There's a couple species I want. Um, Nothing too crazy, but yeah. So if you made it this far, like, comment, subscribe, do all that. Instagram's linked in the bio as always. And thank you guys for watching. See you next week. And hopefully we'll get some guests on here soon. I've got some cool ideas that Alex has do, but for some guest interview style episodes.
Yep. Hope you all have a good night, day, or morning, whenever you listen to this.